Hi guys, Sean here from DigiDirect. Today we're going to be talking about the brand new Canon 80D, which is a new APS-C size sensor DSLR from Canon. Now the 80D replaces the 70D, which has been out for a couple of years. We'll be taking a look at a number of the features on the 80D, and we'll also be comparing them to the 70D. Now the main points that we're going to see here is that the 80D has a lot of improvements in terms of its autofocus capabilities, as well as in its movie making capabilities, so for videography and so on. So we'll jump into those features, but first let's take a quick look at the physical body of the 80D. So we can see that the body looks very similar to the 70D. We'll see that most of the changes are under the hood rather than physical, but it's a very nice solid feeling body, very well built. They've got a nice screen on the top so you can quickly look down and check your settings. They've got an articulating screen that you can flip out and flip all the way around. Nice viewfinder. The body is weather sealed, so if you have a weather sealed lens on there, you're going to have a completely weather sealed package. You can go out in the rain with it and it will be fine. So that's really nice to have in a physical body. But I mentioned most of the changes are not physical, they're under the hood, and the first of that is the new sensor in the 80D. So the 80D has a 24 megapixel sensor. That's in contrast to the 20 megapixel sensor on the 70D. That actually means that the 80D has the highest resolution sensor of all of the Canon APS-C cameras, at least at the time of this review. Even higher resolution than the 20 megapixel 7D Mark II, which is the high end from the crop sensor lineup from Canon. So that's very impressive, good to see. We also see the new Digic 6 processor in the camera here, an improvement over the 5, which is what we saw in the 70D. That's going to help with a lot of things. It allows a number of features, and it specifically allows better autofocus performance, and that's what we'll touch on now. So the 80D has 45 autofocus points on it. Now that's in contrast to the 70D, which had 19. So you're going to have a lot more autofocus points on the 80D. That means that the autofocus is going to be much faster, much more effective. Also, the autofocus points are spread over a wider portion of the frame, so they cover more of the frame. So altogether, just a much better autofocus experience from the 80D than in the 70D. Now, something similar to that, and almost as important, is the low light focusing performance that we see on the 80D. So the 70D was rated to be effective on autofocus in low light at up to half a stop, which is not very much. So that means if you're anything darker than half a stop in terms of exposure, the autofocus is going to have issues. The 80D is rated to be effective in the autofocus up to 3 stops underexposed. So that's quite a big jump. That means that the 80D is going to be very effective at maintaining good autofocus in low light conditions. So maybe you're a wedding photographer, you shoot a lot of indoor reception stuff, concert photographer, anything where you're going to be shooting at low light and you want to be using autofocus, the 80D has a really good system in place to maintain effective autofocus even in low light, which has always historically been a big problem for autofocus systems from various cameras. I'll actually point out that the only other camera in Canon's lineup that has this -3 stops of autofocus performance is their absolute top of the line 1DX Mark II. So to see that feature make its way into the 80D is very impressive. So anyone who's going to be doing low light photography, that's going to make a big difference to your shooting. And then the last point about autofocus is the movie servo autofocus. They also have added some adjustments so you can control the speed of the autofocus. So if you want it to quickly jump from one point to another, you can set it like that, or you can make it be a little bit slower, a little bit of a smoother transition, so a bit more emulating more of a rack focus where it smoothly transitions from one focus point to another. So you can adjust all that in the settings, so you can kind of customize your movie autofocus settings, which is nice. Now that segues nicely into our next major point, which is the video capabilities on the 80D. Canon has made a lot of efforts to make the 80D very friendly for people who want to be shooting DSLR video, which has been very popular over the last couple of years. So they've done a number of things to do that. First of all, they've bumped up the frame rate that the 80D can shoot. So the 80D can shoot a maximum of 60 frames per second at 1080p. So you can get slow motion at full HD, which is very nice. A lot of Canon cameras in the past have only had 60 frames per second when they're shooting at 720, and that's what the 70D had. Now with the 80D, we can shoot at 1080p at 60 frames per second, which is excellent. So they've also added a new mode called HDR video. So you may be familiar with HDR from photography, and HDR stands for high dynamic range. Basically, that's a type of photography that allows you to capture a wider dynamic range, so a wider range between dark areas and bright areas than you normally can. If you're in a high contrast situation, maybe the sky is very bright, but you're shooting something that is in shade, you're going to have a trouble having the highlights not being blown out, but having the darker areas not be just completely in shadows. Now, they've brought that idea into the video mode here with this HDR video. So when you're shooting in HDR video mode, it does shoot at 60 or 50 frames per second, but what it does is it takes 2 frames, one is slightly underexposed, one is slightly overexposed, blends them together and gives you a single frame out of those that has a wider dynamic range. So if you're shooting, HDR mode, it's actually shooting 60 frames per second, but it blends them together and gives you a 30 frames per second video, but of course one that has a higher dynamic range. You can do the same at 50 frames per second, and that gives you a 25 frames per second video. So just a few more movie-related features they've added onto the ADD. They've added a headphone jack on the ADD, which means that you can now monitor your audio. It of course has a microphone jack as well, so you can put an external mic on it. The 70D had the microphone jack, but it didn't have the headphone jack, so you couldn't monitor your audio. They've also added a time-lapse mode on the ADD, so you can shoot time lapses without having any extra special intervalometers and so on to do so. So that's great. Okay, so we'll just touch on a couple more miscellaneous features and improvements on the ADD. They've added an anti-flicker mode. So that's if you're shooting photos at a high frame rate indoors, typically under some kind of, usually it's fluorescent lights that have flickering to them. Often if you're doing that, the photos can have different exposure levels as they catch the lights mid-flicker, for example. With the anti-flicker mode engaged, it detects the flickering and it subtly changes the time that the photos are taken to match the flicker so that the photos are a lot more consistently exposed. So that's very cool to have. And tying into that, I should mention that the ADD can shoot photos at up to 7 frames per second. They've also improved the mirror flip-up mechanism on the ADD. So on the 70D, it was a spring-operated system. On the ADD, they've changed it to a motor-operated system. So that's when the mirror flips up to take a photo. This motor-operated system means that there's less impact from the mirror flipping up, which less internal shake when you take a photo, which is going to improve the sharpness and clarity of your photos. That's something that we see on, again, higher end models like the 5D Mark III has the motor-driven mirror. And again, it's nice that they've got that those high-end features making its way onto the ADD. As well as that, we also see an addition to a second custom dial on the ADD. The 70D had one of these. They've added a second one on the ADD, which we can customize to our liking. And then the ADD also has Wi-Fi with NFC and a GPS. Now, those are the main features on the camera itself. Real briefly here, though, I'm going to touch on a couple other related accessories. Canon has released a number of accessories in conjunction with the ADD that are kind of meant to be used with the ADD. Most of them are video related. So the first is a new lens. They've released the 18-135 Nano USM lens. Now, you're probably familiar with the 18-135 STM lens, which has been one of the kit lenses you can get for the last couple of years from Canon. This Nano USM lens has a new focusing motor. Basically, it's faster focusing. So USM lenses, which are in slightly higher end Canon Canon lenses, are faster focusing, but they can be a little bit louder, which is why the STM versions were introduced to have a quieter autofocusing motors for video. The Nano USM combines both of these. It has the speed of the USM motors and the quietness of the STM motors. So that's a new lens that has been introduced to go along with the ADD. You can get them as bundles if you'd like. Another cool accessory is it's called the PZE-1, and this is a little motorized zoom accessory meant to go specifically with the 18-135. It basically is placed on the bottom of the lens, and it has little contact points on the bottom of the lens for it to touch there. And it allows you to zoom the lens electronically. So there's a zoom rocker on the actual accessory, and it will automatically zoom in and out, giving you a much smoother zoom for video. So, usually when you hand zoom in video, it's a little shaky, it's not an even speed. You typically want an electronic zoom if you're going to be zooming in video, so that allows you to do that. You can also adjust the zoom speed, fast or slow, and so on. Now, those combinations, that new lens and the zoom accessory that goes with that lens, can be used with any camera, but if you're using it with the ADD specifically, you can also control the zooming from your smartphone remotely. So you can connect via Wi-Fi to the ADD, which lets you, control exposure and all these different settings. It also lets you control the zoom with the PZE1. Now, if you're using this with other cameras, you can't control that remotely. It's only with the ADD that you can do the remote control of this feature. Lastly, they've released a new on-camera shotgun microphone called the DME1. It'll go on top of the hot shoe mount here. Like some other shotgun microphones we've seen before, although this one has an added twist that you can change the pickup pattern. So you can have the pickup pattern be full shotgun, which is very directional. It's meant to pick up what it's pointing at. Or you can have it be a 90-degree pickup pattern, which is a little bit wider, or a 120-degree pickup pattern, which is a little bit wider again. So a couple different uses that you can use that by adjusting the pickup pattern. And again, these are all really meant to be released in conjunction with the ADD, so that just really again emphasizes the movie-making capabilities that they've strived to put into the ADD, which is very, very admirable. So there you have it. That's the Canon ADD in a nutshell. A lot of great features for both photo and video shooters. As we touched on, great autofocus performance, as well as very good autofocus performance in low light, which is a bit hard to come by. We've also got a lot of good movie-making features, as well as those accessories that we just touched on. So if you'd like to try the ADD, come into one of our stores. You can give it a test. We've got stores in the Sydney CBD, Melbourne CBD, Bondi Junction, Miranda, and the Brisbane CBD. You can also order the ADD on our website at www.digidirect.com.au. Take care.